So I say if Rome doesn't fit, Babylon doesn't fit, Mecca doesn't fit, and New York doesn't fit, what city does fit? And it's the one I've been saying all along. Chris White's answer is Jerusalem. Again, I pushed back for some of the same surface level reasons that many of you are pushing back on. No, it's God's covenant city. He would never allow them to be Mystery Babylon. Surface level answer. No, Jerusalem will be rebuilt one day. And Mystery Babylon talked about as going to be destroyed one day. Well, surface level answer. I'm picking on myself when I say surface level, because after digging a little deeper in the Bible, you realize that they are surface level answers. Thank you everyone for joining me for these live internet studies week after week. The entire recording is 1.5 hours long. It's made up of 2 segments. First segment is Eschatology, a biblical study of end time events. We're about to start that study shortly. The second 30-minute segment is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism, where we deal with apologetic topics. So I hope you can stick around for both of those. What I've begun to favor is, in the podcast version of this recording, you'll get the entire hour and a half, which includes a lot of the stopping and interjecting, where I share my various thoughts along the lines of whatever I've scripted to write versus going off script. Ends up being a lot longer in terms of exposition. But for the video version, I often trim a lot of that out. And so if you're watching the YouTube videos, you're not getting really all of the show. So this is I think the first time that I'm going to encourage you and plug the audio, the iTunes podcast. And the way you can get to it is just by going just pull up your favorite Google browser, whatever you're using, and type in my name, Ariel Hanavi, and then type in iTunes, or type in my ministry name, Tetze Torah Ministries, Tetzetorah Ministries, and then iTunes, and you'll find links. Or go to my website at tetzetorah.com and follow the little banner along the top of the webpage when it loads up, and you'll find information about live internet studies, to include the information about the podcast that I'm referring to. Okay? All right. Let's jump into segment 1, Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We're in this topic of Mystery Babylon, discussion part 2, topic number 14, and we're working our way down through a book. Well, we're not really going through the book itself. The book, as you can see on your screen, is Mystery Babylon, When Jerusalem Embraces the Antichrist, an exposition of Revelation 17 and 18. What I did is, this is a book by Chris White. He is a Christian author. He's a fellow Prewrather such as myself. He's a futurist such as myself. What I did is I took this book, which is available on this link right here, right at BibleProphecyText.com. The link is in the show notes. The link is in the description, I'm sorry. I took this book and created my own essay and broke that essay down into 8 weeks. And we've been working our way through that particular essay. So we are in week number 6. And what we're going to do, we're going to jump now into the week 6 Refuting Other Views and the opening and recap. Over the last several weeks of this particular study, we've been carefully working through the book of Revelation guided by Chris White's book on Mystery Babylon. And here's what we've noticed so far by working through the essay that I created. We've seen the harlot city identified as a great city, clothed like a priest, but missing obedience. This is not discounting the fact that Mystery Babylon also has elements in the Bible of being a type of a system, not just a city, but false religion, going all the way back to perhaps maybe even Tower of Babel, Babylon, but then picking up some traction when we start to get into a nation that is able to inflict damage on Israel as a people, namely Egypt. So Mystery Babylon is the city, but it kind of has resemblance to a system as well. I don't want to discount those realities, but we looked at some of these details. So right now I'm just going through kind of recap, building up the momentum. We've also seen her alliance with the beast. Remember, when John sees the vision, he sees the woman and he sees the beast. And we identified the beast, at least Chris White does, and I agree with his assessment, that the beast is actually the seventh beast empire, but the Antichrist himself gets assassinated and is brought back to life and becomes the eighth, becomes the leader of the eighth beast empire, of which Mystery Babylon will still have this alliance with. So we've seen her alliance with this beast, her role as a counterfeit priesthood, and her final destruction. Last week, well, 2 weeks ago, in Revelation 18, we listened to the dirge over her fall. Kings, merchants, and sailors mourned while heaven rejoiced. So, where are we now? Tonight, we are in week 6, and we're going to take a slight detour instead of pressing forward into new visions. I'm going to use Chris White's research tonight to address competing views. So, in dealing with these other views that we're going to be looking at tonight, again, I asked the question, why is this important? I say it's because if we're going to be convinced that Jerusalem is Mystery Babylon, then we need to make sure other candidates don't fit the evidence better. All right, so here's the plan for tonight. Number one, we're going to examine the Rome view, the city of 7 hills. I get emails, people say, well, Jerusalem doesn't have 7 hills. I beg to differ. Do you know how many cities have 7 hills? Just do a Google search. I mean, it's insane. There's a few different prominent cities in America that have 7 hills as well. So Rome has 7 hills, Jerusalem has 7 hills. The key is that 7 hills isn't really the only feature, but for some reason, I think because of the reformers, the 7 hills idea became like the dominant view as to who is Mystery Babylon. But John mentions the 7 hills, but he also mentions that there's 7 kings, so don't lose the details. Number 2, we're going to look at the rebuilt Babylon view, a future revival of ancient Babylon in Iraq. You remember when Saddam Hussein was trying to rebuild Babylon? That thing kind of fell to ruins. We'll talk about that. Number 3, we're going to consider the insanely popular among Messianics Mecca Islamic view. Very, very popular recent option, particularly, like I said, among Messianics. Zion's Hope Ministries, which I follow. I'm subscribed to their commentaries and teachings and YouTubes. And their research is top notch. And yet they hold to the Mecca Islamic view, which I don't. Likewise, Joel Richardson literally wrote the book, Islamic Antichrist. I did a whole study on that in this eschatology series where we talked about Islamic Antichrist with the Dajjal and the Mahdi and the Isa, Islamic Jesus, and things like that. Mahdi, I'm switching my pronunciation. I think during the study I said Mahdi, too much breathiness on the H. But Mahdi, I'm going to switch to that one. Well, we talked about that, and I don't hold to that view. But, like I said, it's got some traction, especially among Messianics, and a lot of Christians as well. We'll touch on that. Number 4, we're briefly going to touch on modern Western cities like New York. Briefly, I did bring them into my assessment. New York seems to be a favorite because of the importance that she plays in American finances and other types of decadences that Christians tend to frown on. So, and then 5, we're going to finally see why none of these hold up compared to Jerusalem. Now, remember, in his book, Chris White makes the following observation right in the introduction section of his book. Let me pull a quote from it. Quote, in counting the characteristics given to Mystery Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18, this is Chris White talking, he says, I found over 90 distinct qualities given to it by Scripture. And in this study, I will show that there are explicit biblical interpretations of most, if not all, of these 90 characteristics. And that by comparing Scripture with Scripture, we can come to a more biblical identification of Mystery Babylon. So let's jump into my notes here. By the end of this particular hour, I think you're going to see why Chris White concludes that Jerusalem is the only consistent option that matches all 90 plus characteristics that he claims exist when examining Revelation 17 and 18. And they are these characteristics that really we've already been building up to. So, without further ado, part 1, the Rome view. Okay, so let's start with the most popular one, at least historically, with the reformers. And this is kind of an odd twist. If you go to I think it's Catholic.com. Maybe I'll do this later on. I don't want to do it right now and get sidetracked. But if you look at the Catholic resources, I think it's Catholic.com that I looked at. I look at so many websites, I just lose count. I think it was Catholic.com, and ask and find their study on end times. This is kind of funny. If you ask them who is Mystery Babylon, they're going to tell you it's Rome. You're like, what? Why would Catholics blame? Why would they implicate mystery? Why would they implicate Rome, the very place where their Vatican is and their beloved Pope? Why would they implicate Rome as the Mystery Babylon when clearly Mystery Babylon's a bad guy in the end days, right? She persecutes Christians and things like that. Why would Catholics implicate Rome? Well, the twist is that they're implicating historical Rome, the Rome in of the first century that persecuted Christians, that was responsible for helping us pin the Fox's Book of Martyrs, the Rome that, persecuted Christians in the arena, blah, blah, blah. They're saying, well, it's not our Rome, it's not Catholic Rome, it's historic Rome. They blame it on that. Well, the Reformers disagree. The Reformers, right, when they came along, it's famously known that they just pointed their big bony fingers at Catholic Rome, right? Papal Rome. So it's important to note that when I say start with Rome, there are two different Romes in view, and whichever one you pick, pick your flavor. I don't care. But historically, they've been the most common interpretation. And the argument usually goes like this. Revelation 17:9 says, quote, "Here's the mind which has wisdom. The seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits." And since Rome is famously built on seven hills, many conclude the woman must be Rome, right? And let's kind of peel back some of the logical inconsistencies with saying that. All right, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, the Reformers especially loved this interpretation because it was the Reformers, if you recall, that identified the harlot with the papacy, which they viewed as corrupt. So the Reformers loved loved pointing out the papacy as the corrupt Mystery Babylon that we're going to encounter one day. Now, what's the problem, I say in my essay? Well, first, the very next verse where it talks about the woman sitting on seven hills, the very next verse clarifies. It says they are seven kings. The text itself interprets the symbol, right? The seven heads are not geographical hills, but kings, viz. Rulers. Let's keep going. Second, Rome doesn't fit the description of the city that kills the prophets. Now, historic Rome did, or at least killed the followers of Jesus. But Jesus said in Luke 13:33 that Jerusalem alone carries that guilt. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that kills the prophets, excuse me, kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. And right, I'm quoting Matthew 23 there. But Luke 13:33, if I remember the verse off memory, Yeshua says something to the effect that it's impossible that a prophet could die outside of Jerusalem. Thirdly, I say in my look at Rome never functioned as a priestly city leading the nations in worship. Now, again, Vatican City, perhaps with papal Catholicism, perhaps is functioning in that role somewhat. Revelation's imagery is steeped in Israel's history, not Rome's history, though. So while Rome may have seemed like a good candidate during the Reformation, when we let Scripture interpret Scripture, the case collapses. All right. So again, I do think that Rome may be important in world history. I think she is important. I think the Antichrist will utilize that importance and that popularity for his advantage in leading the world into the final deception that he's going to be doing. But Revelation 17 and 18 isn't pointing to Rome, in my opinion, just isn't.